Hello, everyone, and welcome into FCC Talk. I'm your host, Jayon, and I'm here today with our worship and minister, one Dan Stribling, who is going to be talking to us about a topic that is in the news a lot right now, but I think there is another aspect of this topic that we could talk about that could be a bit more encouraging and
Yeah.
also be more helpful for people today. But before we get to that, Dan, how are things going? How you doing? You enjoying your Thursday?
Yeah, man, I'm doing really good. It's a good day. It's been a pretty good week, so I'm having a good time.
There you go. There you go. So those who don't know, we do record these in advance, typically about a day,
Mhm.
anywhere from a week to a day ahead of time. So
That's
if
right.
something we
Yep.
say in here doesn't reference something recent, that's kind of why that
Mhm.
happens. But today we're going to talk about a recent topic, which is about a week old,
Yep.
unfortunately at this point. But we wanted to talk about the assassination of Charlie Kirk and what that has kind of done to our nation, to our people, and obviously how that impacts our church here as well. I mean, first off, we want to acknowledge how tragic it is that anybody
Yeah.
would lose their life over, I mean, obviously, Charlie was in some ways a political figure, and so whether it was whatever it was, that had to do with the assassination here. And so, anytime anybody is assassinated, anytime anybody has political beliefs that impact that and drive people to,
Mhm.
that's tragic, that's sad, and that's definitely something that we want to voice first and foremost. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dan?
Just basically seconding what you said. I mean, it's obviously a horrible tragedy what happened to him, and taking that kind of action against someone, we have to condemn that because it's unacceptable in every single circumstance. There are times where we've seen in the past you know terrorist leaders, people like that that have been basically they've been killed for what they've done, but all of those have always been spearheaded under the authority of like the government or the military, sanctioned in some kind of military order or law, whereas this was outside of the law, acting individually on a vendetta, and we have to condemn that wholeheartedly.
For sure, for sure, and this is not going to be a podcast that has political commentary or anything like that. We just want to make sure we voice that out in front and in the
Right.
open first. What we do want to talk about is how God can work through moments like right? Obviously, this is a terrible
Yes.
time and something that nobody wanted to happen. However, God has an ability, and not just an ability, but a desire to work through terrible, awful things for His good and
That's
to
right.
bring about, life and change through these types of things. And so that's kind of where we want to point the direction today. I think there's a lot of
Yes.
people online right now and just complaining, maybe not even complaining, but righteously going against people who are celebrating Charlie Kirk's death and things like that. And while that is obviously wrong and something that Dan and I first and foremost wanted to go against, we also want to point out the Christian response to what is happening right now, which is that
That's right.
on social media and in churches around America, many people are coming to church for the first time. Now, I could bring
Yeah.
up a numerous amount of TikToks and tweets and Instagram reels of people saying I went to church today, to kind of give you evidence. But I would just encourage you, if you have social media, just go anywhere and look up this kind of stuff because
Mhm.
there are people saying, "Hey, I went to church for the first time ever on my own. My parents didn't drag me there. Nobody told me I needed to go for a special holiday. I just went to church on my own for the first time ever." And it really reminded me how nervous people are to come to church.
That's
One
right.
girl, and she was explaining her experience. She's a young mom. She has two young children, and she was talking about how she and her husband wanted to raise their young children to be strong and to be strong in their faith, but they'd never taken their
Mhm.
kids to church before. And so for her, she didn't know how it would go. She didn't know what the kids ministry would be like or anything, but she said that the moment she walked in the door, they met an elder. The elder took them everywhere, showed them everything in the church, and she said it wasn't some
Hmm.
big church. It was, just kind of a normal
Yeah, it's a
normal sized
local
church.
church.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And they dropped off their kids at the kids ministry. They went and they obviously went through the worship service and had a good time. She even was reciting some of the quotes and stuff and some of the scripture from the sermon, the message, and she just basically ended by saying, "This is what our family needed. We didn't know we
Hmm.
needed it, but this is what we needed. And we'll be back next week." And I don't know. I wasn't in the service this week, so I don't know if there was an abundance of new faces and people maybe that hadn't been seen. I know there was more probably kids in the kids ministry this Sunday based
Hmm.
on past trends than I would think, but there wasn't a whole bunch. I think maybe one or two new families, which is not uncommon
Yeah.
for a normal Sunday morning. But Dan, I kind of want to start there with people coming to
Okay.
church for the first time, or maybe they haven't been to church in a while, or maybe it's their family's first time. Come, what do
Hmm.
you see? Obviously the Christian response needs to be welcoming and stuff like that, but kind of go a
Absolutely.
little bit deeper. What is the Christian response, not just in the church walls, but also maybe online in our person-to-person interactions outside? You can just kind of go anywhere with this. What
What was that last thing you said there, John?
I said, you can kind of go anywhere with this. Just kind of like the
Okay.
Christian response to this kind of people being more willing or desiring to come to church now, whether it's on their
Yeah.
own or with their family, whatever it might be.
Absolutely. Well, I think obviously there's a couple of things at play here in terms of kind of the cultural situation, but in terms of the Christian response, I think that these are immense opportunities that we have to be able to reach out in a unique way. I think that there are a lot of people out there like the couple that you described. It's like, we want our and given I have actually seen this firsthand from people where you know we may have grown up in the church, we might have even been just sort of adjacent to the church, we might have had some friends, something like that, but we understand we've now got these children and we understand that there's something more to life and we want them to be connected to faith. We understand, we've grown, we've matured, and we see the importance of this in the lives of our kids. But oftentimes in the church, we don't realize how difficult it is for somebody to basically step into the unknown and come into our building. So I think that to me, this serves as kind of a wake up call to us that now is a great time to reach out because the sensitivity is higher, but also B, it's to me a reminder that we need to be more focused on our outreach outside of our four walls and being welcoming and inviting and encouraging, to be able to create some of these bridges so that people feel more comfortable on a regular basis to be able to come and meet the Lord, to be able to come and get their kids involved, to be able to do these things that will ultimately fulfill their goals of strengthening their relationship with the Lord and bringing their entire family closer to Him. Because I think there's a lot of people out there that really do want that, but they don't know what they don't know, and one of the greatest fears we have as people is fear of the unknown. It takes a great amount of courage. So in terms of the church's response, obviously the church also, we talk a lot about the church being a hospital, right? And one of the interesting things that a national tragedy does, one of the interesting things that it does culturally, is it reminds everyone that we are not all as comfortable as we would like to think that we are. Things are not quite as secure as we would like them to be. There's a quote, and I was trying to remember where I heard this, but I this has stuck with me for a while. I think it's so true. And it basically says that betrays comfort betrays to the gates of hell. Comfort is something, it's an insulator. It makes us feel like we're fine where we are, but then something like this happens, a national tragedy happens, maybe it's a financial recession. In this case, it was an assassination. Something comes along which makes us wake up and realize that the world around us is actually a broken and dangerous place. And the natural solution for that is the one who is in command of the universe. So this opens doors, and the church should be ready and receptive to be able to capitalize on that for the good of the gospel and for the good of those that are seeking, I think.
For sure, for sure. And that was kind of where I wanted to go next with. Tragedy is terrible. Obviously, there's been more tragedies that have happened in our country, and there's obviously personal tragedies that happen for people on on a yearly, weekly, daily basis.
That's
In some
right.
of these cases, if you would speak to kind of how God works through tragedy. Tragedy is terrible, but God can use it
Hmm.
to kind of soften our hearts, make us understand how real this world is. I mean, I know for me, I'm still relatively young, 31 years old, but as I
Hmm.
get older, I start to realize like everything is not guaranteed for me. And
That's
and
right.
hearing
Hmm.
these of, people with children and people losing their children, and it's like my children are not guaranteed to be invincible. I'm not guaranteed to be invincible
That's right.
and doing some of these things. So just talk a little bit about how God works through tragedies, obviously this one with Charlie Kirk, but just kind of in general as well, and how Christians can respond to not only help people through those tragedies but also bring them to Christ.
Tragedy reminds us how little control we really have. Tragedies, when they happen, and these major events, and sometimes even minor events. I mean, one of the things that we tend to maybe not forget, but we tend to kind of sideline is that suffering is a natural part of the world, right? We go out of our way in our culture to try to avoid suffering as much as possible. We try to, chase happiness as much as possible, but it is unavoidable and it will find us in some form, in some capacity. So, tragedy, when it strikes, big, small, I am so thankful in my own experience that really I have avoided a lot of major, what I would consider tragedies. We've been very, very blessed with the health of our kids. God has been very, very good to us, but I have had a good share of struggles. And you know what I've noticed every single time it happens? You know what happens every single time I start to get anxious, or every single time it starts to feel like things are out of my control? Do you know what my knee jerk reaction is?
Hmm.
I run back to the arms of Jesus instantaneously.
Hmm.
And what I find is that oftentimes in those moments when the tragedy strikes, or I should say when the hardships strike, it's not always tragedy, but just suffering, the normal trials of life, it makes me realize oftentimes that maybe I've been off track for a little bit. And so there is almost this compass factor that comes in with tragedy where all of a sudden we wake up to what is really the true state of the world, which is the fact that it is broken. We have no control. And the only answer, the only anchor is God Himself. And so the proper reaction, and that a lot of people are experiencing right now, is it's a compass point straight back to Him. And we sort of intrinsically realize that it is out of our control and we need to be in the arms of the one whose control it is in, right? So, um, as much as we hate to talk about tragedy and we wish that we lived in a world without suffering, the fact of the matter is a funeral is a far more fertile ground to share the gospel than a wedding. Okay, because when we are doing our own thing and joyful, and I'm not saying anything bad about weddings, by the way, but weddings are beautiful. It's a blessing of God. It's one of the greatest things in the entire world. But during those funeral times, when we're confronted with the fact that we are temporary, life is temporary, we really have no control, but there is a bridge to the one who does.
Hmm.
That is where the real fruit of the gospel, I think, can bloom right there.
Well, I think it's very telling that in today's culture and world that, you bring up funerals and weddings, and one of those two. And I'm not trying to disparage people by saying this; it's just an
Yeah.
observation. But one of these two has become more normal for ministers to be less involved in. Right, marriage is it's more accepted now for a family member to marry the two or a friend.
Yep.
I mean, I talking to somebody one day, and they told me they went to a wedding the other day where they couldn't decide between the best man between two guys, and so they just had one of them marry them, and the other one was the best man, which was interesting to me. But obviously, I have my thoughts on this.
Interesting.
I'm in a
Yeah.
profession that I believe that they should be doing the weddings. But anyway, you don't see that with right? You don't see oftentimes the best friend getting up there and doing the funeral service. You don't see the
Right.
daughter, the mother getting up there and doing that. It's
That's right.
oftentimes looked to for a minister to do something like that because it's a time of tragedy, hardship. Somebody it has been lost, and we're much more apt to look for answers and to look for someone to go to, whether it be Christ or unfortunately some other things in our lives during tragedy than we are in the easy and the maybe not the easy, but the joyful and the
Right.
celebration times of our lives. And I think that's really important for us to understand when we see, new people coming to church, maybe it's around this time or maybe just in general as well. Almost every single person who is coming to church for the first time is going through something. They may have lost a family member. They may have just
Yep.
moved to the area. They may have just stopped going to their last church because something happened. I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and they just started going to a new church recently. And they were saying that their old church, some stuff happened. I won't go into all the details, but basically some stuff happened, and they had to leave, which is very unfortunate. And they're not the types to just leave easily. So it was something that
Sure.
was difficult for them. And so they went
Sure.
to a new church, and one of the well, it was one of the minister's wives was talking to his wife and just asked like, so what happened that brought you here? And they said, oh, we're just looking for a new church. And she said, no, I'm not trying to pry, but like what happened? Something had to
Yeah.
happen for you to come here. You've lived here for a long time. You're a
Hmm.
young couple. It's not like you guys just up and decided to go to. And this was a few months ago, so it wasn't due to the Charlie Kirk thing or anything.
Sure. Sure.
But she just told him. She said, "Yeah, we other church down the road, and it was really unfortunate, but we had to leave." And the minister's wife just said, "I'm really sorry that you had to go through that, and let me pray for you. And if you guys need anything, we're not trying to compare churches or anything like that, but we just want to be a place where you guys can heal and experience some of the stuff like that without everything else
Right.
around it." And he just talked about how he's never experienced anything like that before, for somebody to recognize that there was something going on in their lives that brought them there in that moment. And I don't necessarily think we have to do that with every single person who comes through the door, but just the recognition of, like you were saying, like somebody coming to church has something going on, and they
Yeah.
might need, I don't know, some extra welcoming, some extra care, whatever it might be, whether they voice it or not. There's a reason they're coming to church that day, and we
Sure.
should do everything we possibly can to help make that experience one that is positive for them to be able to worship God.
Absolutely. And I think that that rings true. One of the challenges of being a minister, and especially someone who's up on stage, is that we sometimes tend to forget that every single person that walks through that door is carrying something. Whether they've been there for 60 years or whether it's their very first Sunday, everybody walks through that door carrying something. And that can be a tremendous challenge sometimes from the stage because, you're carrying something too, right? And yet we are all here and we're all gathered together, and as those of us that are leading, we need to offer something that's going to try to speak to everyone that's there and to be able to present them with the gospel and the hope that they need to hear. And I think we would all do well to just kind of realize that. I have a feeling in that situation, I'll bet that minister's wife that you were talking about, she probably sensed something. She probably may have had, something might have been telling her that, hey, I need to ask this question. You know what I mean? Because I know the Lord works like that. We may not want to like poke and prod every single person, like, hey, what's bugging you today? when they come into church, but we want to be able to be that open and inviting place that whatever it is that they are carrying in those doors has the opportunity to be addressed by the love of God.
For sure.
That's really what we want to see happen.
For sure. And
Um,
the biggest thing is to make sure that whatever is bringing them to church is not just a temporary surge, right? It's not just a reaction or something for a day or
yeah,
two. And I'm not trying to go against emotions here. I think emotions play an important role in helping us, to try to realize what we need and don't need in our lives
right.
sometimes. But try to help people see that this is something that, regardless of if you're going through tragedy or if you're going through
Mhm.
hardship or not, this is something you want consistent in your life, because ultimately
Right.
life is better with God than without him.
Absolutely. Emotions are a tremendously powerful motivator, but a terrible anchor, right? Because they change, they morph over time. How you feel about something is going to change. But in the moment of the emotions, and this is part of the reason why God speaks through tragedy so much, is because our emotions open us up, right? And so for a person that walks into church because, oh, hey, I'm scared right now, right? And I need to know that there is something bigger than me out there that I can cling to. And so they go searching and they come into church. Well, then it's kind of on us, to do the work of sharing the gospel so that their anchor, they were motivated by their emotions, but they get anchored by the truth. It's on us to make sure we present the truth. And that is truth in not just what is preached, but like what you mentioned with people carrying stuff in the door. It's how you care with your words when you run into somebody in the lobby. It's, how polite you are when you're scooting down the aisle to your seat. I mean, all of these different little factors in every single aspect, we need to be showing the love of Jesus to everybody that's around us. And so, emotions do the pushing, the truth does the anchoring, and it's the church's job to bring that truth when the emotions are all stirred up.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Dan, anything else along the lines of this unfortunate news of Charlie Kirk and everything, and kind of trying to look at it from a different perspective of maybe a more positive one with what God can do through the tragedy? Anything else in that realm that you want to bring up?
Well, yeah, I mean, just a couple of things. If we were to kind of boil it down to some simple lessons to take from this, we're definitely seeing God moving, and of course, there's a very very famous verse. If we look back into the Old Testament and the story of Joseph, right, and his, Joseph had every reason to be miserable and bitter, and he wasn't, right? Joseph was taken by his brothers and sold into slavery, ended up being one of the most absolute mind-blowing, fascinating stories in the entire scriptures because of what God did with him, taking him from a prisoner in a jail cell to being second in command in the greatest empire on the face of the earth at that time. It's just like only God could do that. But it's interesting because later on, when Joseph is reunited with his brothers, much years later, and how that works out. If you don't know this story, go read Genesis. I believe it's chapters like 45 to 50. It's right in there. But when Joseph comes into contact with his brothers again years later, he says this to them. This is from Genesis chapter 50, it's verse 20. He says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." I love the Old Testament because the Old Testament gives us a very, very clear window into the nature of God and who he is and how he works. And this is a very strong element of who he is, where there is something evil that is intended. There is an evil plot, there is a sinful action, there is a horrible tragedy. But God is able to extricate from that an extreme amount of positive effects. There's also, this is from, I've got a few different verses pulled up here.
Well,
Romans
I'll
chapter,
just,
yeah,
oh, good. And say if you're
no,
pulling it up, I can share another one.
okay. Well, I've got it right here. It's Romans eight
Okay, go
twenty eight.
ahead.
I just wanted to encourage everybody with this, where Paul writes, he says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose." Now, I've seen that verse twisted to say basically that if you love God, everything in your life is going to be great. That's not the truth. There are tragedies, there are sufferings, but God will work them to bring his goodness out of them, even the horrible things we experience. Go ahead, John. We'll share what you were going to share.
Well, I was gonna say, in addition to that too, when you love God and when His values and your values start to align better, you start to see the good that God brings that maybe you don't see if you're not in Christ, right? If you're not in Christ,
That's
you don't
right.
always
Yeah.
see everything as good because you might have a different value system. But once you are closer to God, you start to see that. The verse I was going to read comes from Romans chapter 12, verse 21. Do not be
Okay.
overcome by evil, but overcome
But
evil
overcome evil with,
with
yeah.
good. And I think that needs to be spoken at this time right now. I think there's a lot of a lot of anger toward
Hmm.
the person that assassinated Charlie Kirk, and there's a whole right side, left side of the political structure right now where
Yep.
people are just kind of going at it. And in reality, there are some on certain. I mean, I'll just say it. There's some on the right side that are responding right now with wanting to maybe not retaliate the same way, but retaliate with anger and hate and some of that stuff. When in reality, that's not the way we as Christians are told to respond. We're not told to respond with revenge. We're told to respond by overcoming evil with good, right?
That's right.
Helping other people to see the truth and to understand. Ephesians talks about it, chapter 6, verses 10 through 13 as well. I'm not going to read all of them, but go read it for yourself. The battle is not with the people. The battle is with the devil.
That's right.
And we need to use the truth in those situations. And so, while yes, people do bad things, your enemy is not to go dominate the person and go defeat the person. Your enemy is to use the truth to help them see the truth, to help them
Hmm.
understand who God is and how much He loves them and cares for them, but also
Hmm.
the areas of their lives where they are not aligning with God, and therefore, if they're not aligning with God, they're not with Him, and don't have life to be with Him. Any thoughts there, Dan?
Yeah. Oh, I've got so many thoughts on this one because this is such a tricky one. Not necessarily a tricky one, but it's a very hard reality. The fact that, oh my gosh, I get so many thoughts on this one. We are called to love all people, even the ones that celebrate evil. That is, it seems so easy when we stand there in church and we talk about God's love and how God loves all of his creation and how we are called to love. It just, to me, that's one of those things that bounces off, because then something like this happens, and I see people righteously angry about the situation, but also turning rage and hatred against those that, I mean, and I get it. That's the thing, though. I get it. I understand, but we are still called to love every single person that disagrees with what you might think is still an image bearer of the one true God. Okay. Every single one of those people is an image bearer of the one true God. And I remember something I was told. I have a lot of good wisdom from when I was growing up. And one of the things that I remember my dad telling me is he would always say, you can't expect people outside of the faith to behave like they are. You can't expect that. People who don't believe what you do are not going to act like you do, and they're not going to have the same moral compass that you do, and you can't expect them to. What we have to do is we have to love them and show them the truth, right? And I would just encourage everyone. It is okay to be righteously angry at a horrible crime that's been perpetrated, but we have to be so careful that we don't allow that. Who we should be angry at, who we should be hateful towards. We should be hateful towards the evil one whose influence causes these things and influences and tempts the minds of those that are far from God. That is who we should be angry at. That is our enemy. We're a lifeboat trying to save people. We're not trying to, shoot them in the water. I can't think of a good metaphor, but we're called to love.
Exactly, exactly. We'll end it there. Great message there at the end by you, Dan. I do want to say I'll have a little bit more on this on the Biblically Literate podcast this Tuesday. Unfortunately, we did not get that up this Tuesday. Had some complications there. but that has been posted this week. It just was not up Tuesday. This Tuesday, you should see the Biblically Literate podcast in your feed, and we're going to talk about turning the other cheek and what that means. And I think it's relevant right now to understand what that means. I think sometimes we have this idea of it just means you're passive and you just let people keep abusing you, and that's not what it means. There's a much deeper meaning there. So I want to dissect that verse, Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42. Means, and I think it'll help us in our Christian response to some of the things going on in the world today. So, Dan, thank you so much for coming on. Any final thoughts or anything before we get out of here?
Any final thoughts? Once again, I would just encourage us all to love. It really is the harder path, but you know what? We walk a narrow road, and we are called as representatives of Christ to do the hard thing. So get on your knees. Now is the time to prostrate ourselves before God, really, really seek him, and do our best to love those around us, even through the mess.
I agree. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Moment. Don't waste this moment in our country right now. Don't waste this moment that people are turning to God. Doesn't happen often. Enough. And we can be the hand of Christ here to bring people closer to him. We just need to accept it, be willing to go out, have the courage, have the boldness to do it. Go out there, love some people, help show them the truth, and help them understand. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good one.